Welcome all. We are starting promptly at 6:30, which is right now. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us this evening in the Great Gallery. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Larry Nichols. Please bear with me while I tell you a little bit about goings-on at the museum and give you a short bio to our speaker. My name is Duffy Maddox, and I am the Toledo Museum of Art's Exhibition Events Specialist. I started my TMA journey here in January of 2021 with Larry working in the curatorial department. So it only makes sense that for the very last lecture that I host in the Great Gallery as we know it, it will be featuring him. As many of you know, December 15th, this gallery and many of the galleries surrounding it will be closed, with plans for a grand reopening in 2027. I invite each of you to deeply savor the next hour that we are going to spend together here. And visit again, spending more time with the art. If you'd like to learn more about the transformation that the museum is undertaking, you can do so on our website, toledomuseum.org, or by attending a town hall event that is this Sunday, November 16th at 3 p.m. in our Little Theater. If you have any questions about this or any event, anytime, and you see me, come right over and ask a question, or you can find all of this on our website. You will see opportunities to spend time with the European collection that includes tours, music, and the chance to hear from our museum's archivist. But I know that you're not here to listen to me. We're here to listen to Larry. Allow me just one more moment to tell you about our speaker tonight. Lawrence W. Nichols is the Curator Emeritus at the Toledo Museum of Art, retiring in 2021. Previously, he held the title of William Hutton Senior Curator of European and American Painting and Sculpture before 1900. He joined TMA in 1992 after serving as the Associate Curator of the John G. Johnson Collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, now known as the Philadelphia Art Museum. A specialist in Northern Baroque painting, he holds a PhD from Columbia University and a BA from Dartmouth College. His books, The Paintings of Hendrik Goltzius, remains a leading resource in the field. During his tenure at TMA, Dr. Nichols curated many major exhibitions, including The Brilliance of Caravaggio, Franz Hall's A Family Reunion, Manet, Portraying Life, Van Gogh, Fields, Hendrik Goltzius, Dutch master, drawings, prints, and paintings. He contributed numerous important acquisitions, such as the one behind me, and many others, and served for many years as the curatorial liaison for the Georgia Wells Apollo Society. It is now my honor to welcome to the microphone Dr. Larry Nichols.
Thank you, Duffy, for your kind words of introduction, and thank you to those folk who always go unseen and unthanked, the museum's IT staff, and certainly a genuine thanks, an expression of gratitude for all of you coming out to my presentation this evening. I am quite willing to wager more than a few of you will remember I commenced a lecture which I delivered at the TMA on the 23rd of February 2018. It commenced as follows. Sloth, wrath, envy, pride, the 7 deadly sins, collectively known as that, and the title of that presentation was Gluttony, Lust, and Them Other Pitfalls, the 7 Deadly Sins in Art. This evening, I begin in comparable manner. Temperance, prudence, fortitude, justice, faith, hope, charity, the 7 heavenly virtues. And the title of this talk is Temperance, Charity, and Them Other Moral Platitudes, the 7 heavenly virtues in art. A variant wording in some cases, and often deviating somewhat in concept, is the following cluster of 7 virtues known as the 7 capital virtues, listed here in the right column: temperance, chastity, charity, diligence, patience, gratitude, and humility. Note there are 2 overlaps, temperance and charity. And you will quickly register that the 7 deadly sins have their counterparts in the 7 capital virtues: gluttony with temperance, lust with chastity, and so forth. This dichotomy, this polarity, this correspondence of wrong and right, evil and good, has a long history in Western thought. And if I focused on our demons in my lecture of, coincidentally, 7 years ago, it is my intention to examine our better angels in my presentation tonight. For you aficionados of Latin in the audience, I offer this visual which lists the vices and the capital virtues with both their English and corresponding Latin names. I show you here one of the galleries of the unbelievably important collection of the Museo di Capodimonte in Naples, and I don't mean Florida. Visible on the far wall is Annibale Carracci's painting having as its subject the choice between virtue and vice, or Hercules at the crossroads. An oft depicted story in Renaissance and Baroque European painting, the parable was invented by the 5th century BC Greek sophist Prodicus, a friend of Plato and Socrates. Though his text is lost, it was retold numerous times, including the accounts of the early 4th century BC Greek writer Xenophon, as well as by the 1st century BC Roman writer Cicero, and so the literary sources for the story are many. Painted in 1597, 95 to 97 by the late 16th, early 17th century Bolognese painter Annibale Carracci for the ceiling of a room in the Farnese Palace in Rome, it was replaced by a copy in 1662. And in the center, we see a young, thoughtful Hercules, as he was known to the Romans. He is seated under a tree in heroic nudity, his muscular physique balanced by his immense club. Hercules is depicted contemplating his future, as Xenophon writes, whether he will approach life by the path of virtue or the path of vice. And there appeared 2 women of great stature making toward him. To Hercules' left, our right, appears the scantily clad personification of pleasure, that is, vice. She gestures to playing cards and musical instruments in the bottom right. There are the cards down there, and there's a musical instrument. She also points to theatrical masks, and behind her appears a rich, green, luxuriantly blossoming landscape. Pleasure entices him with her presence, the symbols of carnal pleasures, and her words, as one of the text source has it, Hercules, I see that you are in doubt about which path to take toward life. Make me your friend, follow me, and I will lead you along the pleasantest and easiest road. You shall taste all the sweets of life, and hardship you will never know. To Hercules' right, our left, we see the personification of virtue. She points to a windy road in an arid landscape, atop which we see a winged horse, Pegasus, the emblem of the Farnese family, who will guide Hercules to Mount Olympus. Quote, "I too am come to you, Hercules," one text has it. "I have taken note of your character during the time of your education. Therefore, I hope that if you take the road that leads to me, you will turn out a right good doer." A little bit troubling translation of high and noble deeds. "But I will not deceive you, for all things good and fair, the gods give nothing to man without toil and effort. If you want the favor of the gods, you must worship the gods. If you desire the love of friends, you must do good to your friends. If you cover honor from a city, you must aid that city. If you are fain to win the admiration of all Hellas," that means Greece, "for virtue, you must strive to do good to Hellas." The still indecisive hero will, of course, opt for virtue. And in the lower left, we see a laurel-crowned poet who will write of Hercules' deeds, hence bestowing immortality on his accomplishments. Virtue will lead to great renown. Another rendering of the subject is this painting in the Louvre by the Dutch artist Gerard de Laresse, whose Hercules between vice and virtue is datable to about 1685. As the Paris Museum's object label reads, the hero Hercules must choose between a beautiful seductress, vice, seen here at right, and a chaste companion, virtue. The artist captures a young, agitated Hercules clutching his club and looking straight out at the viewer. His torso is slightly turned to the demurely garbed figure of virtue, though his left hand still rests on the thigh of vice, depicted at the very threshold of a wardrobe malfunction. Youthful indecision? Perhaps. Likely better known to many of you is a painting visible in this image on the far wall of the West Gallery of the Frick Collection in New York, Paolo Veronese's The Choice Between Virtue and Vice. The moral lesson in Veronese's painting of the theme of Hercules at the crossroads between virtue and vice, a life of pleasure and vice, or one of hardship, honor, and virtue, has a contemporary, that is to say, mid-16th century character to it. The painting can be dated to about 1565. Before a tree, a cloud-filled blue sky, as well as ruins with a sculpture, are three figures, a woman, a man, and another woman. She at right easily can be identified as virtue. With her countenance directed downward, she is somberly dressed in a green robe and wears a laurel wreath, symbolic of glory and military victory. No surprise that virtue is juxtaposed with vice. Benign at first sight, a closer examination of vice reveals her sinister role. Lavishly dressed, albeit with her dress unfastened, a garland of cyclamen flowers, a bloom used for love potions, adorns her hair. Though we do not see her face, we can extrapolate her seductive look. She clutches playing cards in her left hand and sits on or leans against a marble statue of a naked woman with lion paws, a mythical sphinx who connotes danger. The jagged knife rests against that sphinx-like figure. And though we, the viewers, see the playing cards, the sphinx, and the knife, please register that Veronese's composition conveys that the man does not. He does, however, feel the presence of this woman, for her right foot, in fact, is a claw. A claw that tears the stocking and inflicts a bloodied wound on his left calf. No club anywhere in sight. No heroic nudity. rather wearing a white satin garment, the likes of which is encountered in Venetian portraits of the time, the man in the center here cannot be identified as Hercules. Then who is he? Would that it were known by whom this painting was commissioned, for that knowledge might well lead to an answer to this tantalizing question. What can be speculated is that we have a portrait here, conceivably, however, of a deceased individual, as suggested by the white clothing, and a person likely easily recognizable to the work's 16th century audience, who is not choosing between vice and virtue, but one striding toward virtue, seeking virtue's compassion and protection. To be sure, it's very telling that Veronese includes in the upper left corner an inscription above the sculpture, and it reads in translation, "Honor and virtue flourish after death." So, the choice between virtue and vice, or Hercules at the crossroads, or in the case of this Veronese, a contemporary personality, was one theme in the Renaissance and Baroque painting. Another was the expelling of the vices as well as the rewarding of the virtues, to which I would now turn our attention. In the 945-foot-long Grand Gallery of the Louvre, that's over 3 football fields in length, and it was once half again longer, is displayed a series of 5 paintings originally created to decorate the studiolo of Isabella d'Este in Mantua. 4 are visible in the image at left. They were painted in the years 1497 to 1511 by Parigino, Lorenzo Costa, who made 2 of the canvases, as did Andrea Mantegna, one of whose contributions you can see at right. Together, the series visualized a utopia of human harmony in which the arts flourished, which is only possible with virtue's defeat of vice, the very subject of this remarkable endeavor by Mantegna, Minerva chasing vices from the garden of virtue. In the Renaissance, virtues and vices were sometimes associated with classical gods, and in this instance, Minerva is a personification of prudence, and Diana of chastity, with both fighting off lascivious Venus and her attendant Cupid. At the composition's far left appears a distraught human tree having a scroll around it with Latin and Greek and Hebrew, the inscriptions calling, quote, "For Minerva, goddess of wisdom and the arts, and Diana, an embodiment of chastity, to expel the vices and threaten both learning, the vices that threaten both learning and moral purity." Just to the right of the human tree, we see Minerva with her shield and a broken spear, and before her, the vices flee. Minerva's face has been identified, not incidentally, as resembling that of the painting's patroness, Isabella d'Este. Diana, the figure in blue, and her bow, she who symbolizes chastity. And in the foreground, armless sloth and a hag. The monkey-like figure in the center foreground has a scroll around its arm which identifies it as immortal hatred, fraud, and malice. The nude female figure with a bow and with Cupid nearby, of course, is Venus, astride a fleeing, lusty, half-human, half-animal centaur. And in the lower right corner, avarice leaning forward, ingratitude leaning back, both carrying fat-crowned ignorance. In the sky at the upper right, left to right, justice with the sword and scale, fortitude with the club and column, and temperance diluting wine. Not to be overlooked, the fluttering scroll at the far right states, So far, wisdom has been trapped in the rocky wall. In a large gallery, the Salle des États, just off the Grand Gallery in the Louvre, in which most visitors are gawking at and taking photographs of Madame Mona Lisa, as you witness at the bottom of this image, is displayed a large upright oval painting executed by Veronese, an artist we have just encountered. And this painting is called Jupiter, King of the Roman Gods, Expelling the Vices. It was painted in 1553 to 56 for the ceiling of the Sala della Consiglio dei Deci, the Hall of the Council of Ten in the Doge's Palace in Venice. Jupiter, seen at top, hurls thunderbolts at the crimes that endanger the state: calumny, lust, rebellion, and corruption. The painting alludes to the role of the Council of Ten, one of the governing bodies of the Republic of Venice, which was responsible for state security. Likewise, in the same years, 1553 to 56, and now also in the Louvre, is Veronese's Saint Mark, patron saint of Venice, rewarding the theological virtues. It too was painted de sotto in su, that is, to be seen from below, as it was initially installed in the ceiling of another chamber in the Doge's palace, the Stanza della Bussuolo. We witness St. Mark, patron saint of Venice, hovering in the upper register in the act of crowning allegorical figures of the three theological virtues: faith with a chalice, hope with an anchor, and charity with a child. As was the case with Veronese's Jupiter, King of the Roman Gods, Expelling the Vices, this work also symbolizes the Venetian Council of Ten's responsibility for state security. Marley, we need to advance, friend.
That's okay.
Thanks, thank you. That's why I thank the IT staff up front. From whence the tradition of the concept of vices and virtues? You've already heard me utter the names Prodicus, Xenophon, and Cicero. And indeed, it is to the Greco-Roman world that we find the literary as well as visual antecedents. For the forthcoming section of my remarks, I want to acknowledge my indebtedness to a 2015 publication edited by Sean R. Tucker, The Virtues and Vices in the Arts, a source book which compiles, and I quote, the source documents that have helped establish the philosophical, religious, social, and artistic discussion about virtues and vices of the Western civilization. The Greek philosopher Plato, who lived from about 427 to 348 BC, and I show you here Raphael's pseudo portrait of him in his famed School of Athens in the Vatican. Plato at left, Aristotle at right. Plato in the Republic describes how an ideal state is based upon people following their best innate inclinations. He narrates a discussion between Socrates and various speakers about the character of a good city, an ideal state or community. Needed is an elite class that manifests wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. These principles are the source of what Ambrose of Milan, more about him shortly, termed the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. The 1st century BC Roman philosopher Cicero, who you see here in a contemporaneous marble bust today in the Capitoline Museum in Rome, echoed Plato with his statement, "Virtue may be defined as a habit of mind in harmony with reason and the order of nature. It has 4 parts: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance." Again, Cicero, "Only virtus usually wards off a cruel and dishonorable death, and virtus is the badge of the Roman race and breed. Cling fast to virtus, I beg you, men of Rome, as a heritage that your ancestors bequeathed you. All else is false and doubtful, ephemeral and changeful. Only virtus stands firmly fixed. Its roots run deep. It can never be shaken by any violence, never moved from its place. The word virtue comes from Latin, vir, meaning man. Virtus was a specific virtue in ancient Rome that carried connotations of valor, masculinity, excellence, courage, character, and worth, all perceived as masculine strengths. It was thus a frequently stated virtue of Roman emperors and was personified as a deity, virtus. She's better than I am.
Give it a good hard press.
I show you here a sacrificial altar of the deity Virtus, dating from the 3rd century of the Common Era, today in a museum in Cologne. Thus, at the heart of the Roman ethical thought are what would come to be known as the 4 cardinal virtues, which were essential to the moral framework of Roman culture. Prudence, the virtue of wisdom, and wisdom and foresight in decision-making. Fortitude, which represents courage and strength in facing adversity, and temperance, the virtue of moderation and self-control, as well as justice, the embodiment of fairness and equity, ensuring that individuals receive what they are due. Just today, for example, I saw the word justice on a car magnet affixed to a vehicle. Marley, this is going to be continuous. If it's me, I apologize. I want to go back one. There we are. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius discussed these virtues in his Meditations and views them as the goods that a person should identify in one's own mind, as opposed to wealth or things which are conducive to luxury and prestige. Can you advance them yourself back there when I say next? Well then, if you're taking this, I need the pointer.
Yes. Can you try and press it harder one more time?
Yes. I'm pressing all the way down. The Greco-Roman philosopher and historian Plutarch, who you see now, composed his parallel lives probably at the beginning of the 2nd century. The publication, and I show you here the title page of an edition published in London in 1727. This publication consisted of a series of 48 biographies of famous men. Their lives are arranged in pairs to illuminate their common moral virtues or failings. Next, please. It comes as no surprise that Greco-Roman thinking influenced and merged with Judeo-Christian traditions. One reads in the Book of Wisdom, also known as the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 7, wisdom teaches moderation, that is, temperance. Wisdom teaches moderation and prudence, righteousness, that is, justice, and fortitude, and nothing in life is more useful than these. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 13, is certainly a very well-known New Testament passage, renowned from readings at weddings, probably many of yours in the audience. And now faith, hope, and love abide. These three, and the greatest of these is love. The triumvirate of faith, hope, and love would come to be known as the theological virtues. Next, please. I show you here a 5th century mosaic depicting St. Ambrose of Milan, found in St. Vittoria in Ciel d'Oro in Milan. The 4th century theologian, one of the 4 church fathers, along with Jerome, Augustine, and Gregory the Great, was the first to employ the phrase cardinal virtues, referring to prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Next, please. This page from a medieval manuscript depicts chastity as a warrior with a spear, helmet, and shield fighting a disheveled lust. Prudentius, a 4th, early 5th century Roman Christian poet who lived in Roman-controlled Spain, wrote a very important text known as his Psychomachia. The plot consists of personified virtues fighting personified vices. Chastity against lust, what you see here, faith against idolatry, long-suffering against wrath, lowliness and hope against pride, sobriety against indulgence, reason and good works against greed, and concluding with virtues overcoming discord and building a temple to wisdom. Merging Christianity with classical culture, Prudentius's writing survives in approximately 16 medieval manuscripts dating from the 9th century to the year 1289, some being illustrated, witness the present image. Next, please. Here is a second illustration. I know it's a little out of focus, from another manuscript, this one dating from the 10th century and belonging to the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. The 2 figures wear long garments and have mantles on their head. Pride, on horseback, lunges forward, her drapery billowing, while humility is still composed, poised, and secure. The next writer to take note of is Evagrius Ponticus, also called Evagrius the Solitary, a Christian monk and ascetic who lived from 345 to 399 of the Common Era. Evagrius, a highly educated classical scholar born in northern Turkey, was active as a scholar in Jerusalem, but retreated to the desert in Egypt. There he developed a system of categorizing various forms of temptation and created a list of vices or evil spirits that must be overcome so as to attain proper prayer, meditation, and wholeness with God. Gluttony, fornication, avarice, anger, sadness, acedia, that is despondency, vainglory, and pride. These 8, and I quote, thoughts or demons, evil forces, as he labeled them, were the focus of his writings, which became the foundation for penitential manuals, which in turn would become the basis for the 7 deadly sins. The final early Christian thinker I want to cite is Gregory the Great, who lived from circa 540 to 604 of the Common Era. One of the church fathers, I show a fresco of him as well as the altar dedicated to him, containing his tomb located in the north transept of St. Peter's in the Vatican. Gregory the Great was pope from 590 to 604. He revised Evagrius's list of the 7 deadly sins, and in his publication, Morals on the Book of Job, Gregory established the most common list of the 7 heavenly virtues consisting of the 4 cardinal or classical virtues derived from Plato and Greco-Roman culture, in which the world is ordered by man, hence a humanistic cosmology, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and the 3 theological virtues stemming from Paul, in which God is the center, hence a theocentric cosmology, faith, hope, and charity, or translate it as love as you will. Gregory the Great was extraordinarily popular throughout the medieval period, and as Tucker, the aforementioned author or compiler of the book that I cited, he called Gregory the Great the preserving link and the foundational source for ideas about virtue and vice. In the Renaissance, the 7 heavenly virtues were painted as a group, as well as on occasion individually, most commonly charity. This 16 by 58-inch panel today in the museum in Birmingham, Alabama, that decorated the front of a cassone, a wooden chest often given at the time of a wedding. It was the creation of Francesco Pezzolino and workshop in Florence about 1450. And in the top register of this image, left to right, are female personifications of each of the virtues, And in the lower register are famous representatives from history of them. Prudence with Solon, the Athenian statesman below, justice with Solomon, faith with St. Peter, charity with St. John the Evangelist, third from right, hope with St. James the Major, fortitude with Samson, and temperance with Scipio Africanus. Next, please. Only 2 decades later are these large panels, one for each of the 7 heavenly virtues. They were painted from 1469 to 1470 by Piero del Pogliuolo and Botticelli. Today in the Uffizi in Florence, they were commissioned for the Tribunale di Mercatanzia in Florence, a secular commercial institution, and were originally displayed behind the administrator's seats in the tribunal hall, the authority of the economic institution. Each female personification is enthroned on a precious marble throne decorated with classicizing motifs and is shown with long-standing traditional attributes. Fortitude is depicted as a young woman wearing armor beneath her delicate gown and clutching the baton of command. Temperance is portrayed mixing hot and cold water. Faith holds a crucifix and the chalice of the Eucharist. Hope, her hands joined in prayer, raises her eyes to heaven. This is charity, clutching a flaming heart and suckling a child. The next one's hope. There you see hope. And the next one, please, justice, who holds a sword in her right hand and balances the world on her left knee. And lastly, prudence, who holds a mirror to see behind her and clutches a snake, which a passage in the Gospel of Matthew tells us is by nature a prudent animal. This fresco by Raphael to this day found on the south wall of the Stanza della Segnatura in the private apartments of Pope Julius II in the Apostolic Palace of the Vatican dates from the years 1508 to 11. Its subject, the cardinal and theological virtues. In the lunette above the window appears 3 of the cardinal virtues personified as statuesque women seated in a landscape. At the left, we see fortitude. She wears armor and caresses a lion with her left hand. She also is seen with a sapling of black oak, symbolizing strength and alluding to the Della Rovere family to which Pope Julius II belonged. Seated in the center is Prudence. On her breast is an effigy of a winged gorgon to ward off deceit and fraud. Her head has 2 faces shown in profile. Her youthful feminine face looks forward into a mirror. This is an allegory of wisdom and knowledge of the present. The backward-facing visage of the old man peers into the past for sound judgment predicated on experience. We will encounter this motif once again. Temperance appears on the right. She holds a bridle of restraint. Next, please. The 4th cardinal virtue, justice, is depicted in a prominent position as a tondo on the ceiling directly above the fresco. She holds scales and a sword. As for the whereabouts of the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, they are depicted as putti, winged infants, in the lunette. One representing charity harvests the acorns from the oak branch held by fortitude. Hope holds a flaming torch to the face of the old man's face at the right of Prudence's head. And faith is the puto who points upward to heaven with his right hand at the far left by Temperance. The far right. As I noted at the outset of my talk, the 7 heavenly virtues through the course of the centuries had variants called the 7 capital virtues: chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, kindness, patience, and humility. These were conceived as contrary or remedial virtues opposed to the 7 deadly vices, and as such, one encounters them in juxtaposition with them. Some of these pairings are to be found in many of the famous churches, both immense and small, in Europe. You've been looking now at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Amiens, France, located some 85 miles due north of Paris. This monumental Gothic structure, the largest in France, it has an inner volume twice the size of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, dates from the years 1220 to 1235. An image of the cathedral's facade, and this showing the three portals. It is the main entrance, the decoration of the central portal, that I now want to show you. Here is the Beau Dieu in the center, beautiful God sculpture between the doors. At the sides, each looking toward Christ, save for that of St. Thomas, are full-length sculptures of the 12 apostles. It is, however, to the quatrefoil reliefs below the apostles to which I want to direct your attention. Below each of the apostles, in two registers, are 12 images of virtues. Above are the virtues and 12 images of the vices below. This expanded number, deviating from the canonical 7 virtues, 7 vices, was necessitated by the number of apostles, differing logics for differing circumstances. Right of the door, fortitude with cowardice, patience with wrath, gentleness with violence. And here you see gentleness and violence. The next, please. There's gentleness and violence. Next, please. Charity at top and at right with greed. The virtues throughout are stately, serene, seated figures holding a shield emblazoned with an attribute. Here, as we see, a lamb on the shield of charity. Next, please. Hope and despair. Next. Faith and idolatry. Next, please. The overarching iconographic program of the central portal. What is the intended message for the pilgrim coming to this place of worship? If one chooses to follow virtue and avoid vice, as depicted in the quatrefoils below, you can build your life upon the prototypes of the apostles and of Christ, depicted in the high relief full-length sculptures, and attain heaven rather than eternal damnation in hell, as depicted in the tympanum above it, in which the last judgment is represented. It's at this juncture I have to remind people I'm an art historian, not a priest. I'm just trying to explain art history. Next, please. This is the Scrovegni Chapel, also known as the Arena Chapel, a small church adjacent to an Augustinian monastery in Padua. A small church containing a landmark of the early Italian Renaissance. For inside, the barrel-vaulted, entirely smooth-walled, 67-foot long, 28-foot wide, 42-foot high chapel, one encounters, more accurately stated, one is enveloped in a fresco cycle painted from 1304 to 1312 or so by the cornerstone artist Giotto. Groundbreaking for their narrative power and astonishing breakthrough in perspectival representation, the scenes of the life of the Virgin, the youth and ministry of Christ, and the passion of Christ in 3 registers on the side walls of the nave are the veritable stuff of any Art 101 course. But for present purposes, I want to focus on what Giotto painted on the bottommost register, the dado, that which is at eye level, where we see simulated marble panels interspersed with grisaille simulated statues. Giotto positions the churchgoer in the middle of a struggle, a moral dialogue, the conflict of the soul, that is, the psychomachia of the virtues and vices. In this space of ethical reflection, with an image of the Last Judgment dominating the longitudinal axis of the chapel over the west entrance, that is, opposite the altar, on that far wall in this slide, you see Christ, the elected on their way to heaven, and the damned sentenced to hell. One is confronted left to right in these lower images by personifications of prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice, faith, charity, and hope, as seen in the top row of what you see on the screen now. And on the other side of the nave, Giotto painted personifications of the 7 vices, though not all the standard ones. Here at the bottom, right to left, foolishness, inconstancy, wrath, injustice, false beliefs, envy, and desperation. Here's prudence and foolishness. The virtues are on the right of Christ in the Last Judgment. Fortitude and inconstancy, the latter rolling over a ball, ready to fall. And the vices are on Christ's left in the Last Judgment. Temperance with a sheathed sword and wrath tearing her clothes. Moreover, all the figures are facing Christ in the Last Judgment. Justice and injustice, these concepts are deliberately positioned in the very center of the chapel and are of consequence for the significance of the entire chapel's imagery. Faith and false beliefs, you will note that each of the figures is identified in the framing above, fides meaning faith, etc. Next, please. Charity and envy. Next, please. Hope, which is closest to Christ, across from despair, a suicide. The program here is one of moral cure, a therapy of opposites that guides and determines human destiny. Giotto certainly had a theologian advisor, who worked out the iconography of the entire interior painted surfaces with the painter, a program which is in large measure derives from the writings of St. Augustine. So as we've seen, the 7 heavenly virtues, or 7 capital virtues, either by themselves or paired with variations of the 7 deadly vices, decorated civic, mercantile, and ecclesiastical structures, be it in painted or sculptural form. So too, artists working in graphic media took up these subjects, and the mass production of engravings led to inexpensive general consumption of the imagery. The 16th century Flemish painter and draftsman Peter Bruegel the Elder created a series of drawings in 1556 to 57 representing the 7 deadly sins, which a year later were engraved. So too in 1559 he made drawings that would be engraved for a series, the 7 virtues. Each of the images has a main central female embodiment of the virtue or vice, and I'm showing you here gluttony from his 7 deadly sins series. Depravity reigns as humans intermingle with anthropomorphic demons, remarkably filling the entire composition. Dame Gluttony, front and center, guzzles from a pitcher encouraged on her by a demon clothed in a monk's garb. Excessive imbibing and overeating leads to vomiting, which you can make out on the bridge in the lower right, and the need to haul one's massive belly about in a wheelbarrow, a detail at right. Next, please. This is Bruegel's Lust. The names in Latin of each of the sins and virtues appear in the foreground, luxuria in this case. Again, we witness the fantastic and phantasmagoric as naked and quite weird at times, deformed humans interact with bizarre hybrid creatures. The message, vice itself is unnatural. Next, please. Here is Charity, the allegorical figure personifying this virtue, holds in her hand a flaming heart, symbolizes her love of God. A pelican, believed to give its own blood to its young, has alighted on her head. Children, beggars, the poor, the lame, the sick, the hungry, the incarcerated, yea, even the dead, the need of all are taken care of. Bruegel's personification of Fortitude holds a column and sports an anvil on her head. She can withstand any blow. She treads on vice, and this image in fact includes many of the monsters of his 7 deadly sin series. Gluttony with a pig in the lower left, and just below that in the absolute lower left is a peacock, Pride's peacock, and on the right side is Anger's bear. Throughout, Fortitude's soldiers prevail, forcing the fleeing demons into a pit seen in the right foreground and into a decaying egg seen in the distance at upper right. And in the center top, we see the castle of the soul. Though visually engaging and even comical, the prints simultaneously have their didactic character. The Latin inscription here reads in translation, "To conquer one's impulses, to restrain anger and the other vices and emotion, this is true fortitude." As the museum announcement for this talk conveyed, I come now to the component of my presentation that considers 4 Parisian monuments displaying representations of the 7 virtues, 2 churches, a palace, and a fountain. This prompted by my beginning preparations for this lecture when residing for 5 months in that phenomenal city earlier this year. The first is the Église Saint-Étienne-du-Mont, located behind the Pantheon on the left bank in the 5th arrondissement. Next, please. Voila, the facade of the church, construction of which began in 494 and was completed in 1624. It houses the shrine of Saint Genevieve, the patron saint of Paris. The nave has 2 levels of arcades and is separated from the choir by a most unusual French Renaissance road screen created in around 1530. At right, you can see the pulpit, the raison d'etre of my taking you to this edifice. Installed in 1651, the pulpit is the work of the cabinet maker Germain Pilon, and I hasten to add the same name but not the same artist as the famous 16th century sculptor. Providing structural support for this pulpit in this sculpture is this sculpture representing the Old Testament strongman Samson kneeling on the lion he had slayed. Decorating the exterior of the pulpit's winding staircase are female personifications of the 7 heavenly virtues. At top is Prudence with her attributes, a mirror and a snake, which wraps around her left forearm. Next is Justice with her sword. Next is Faith, who is shown clutching a heart and a cross. Next is Hope with her anchor, the source being Paul's letter to the Hebrews. That is hope. Hope is like an anchor for our lives. It enters in through the veil. Next is Temperance. Next is Fortitude with a bludgeon. And lastly is Charity, represented with children. The second structure in Paris that I wish to discuss is one that in fact does not exist anymore, the Tuileries Palace. Up until the late 19th century, this palace was located there. Right there, between the Pavillon de Flore, adjacent to the Seine, and the Pavillon de Marsan, abutting the Rue de Rivoli. and it closed off the vast Louvre from the Tuileries Gardens. This color print illustrates the placement and appearance of the Tuileries Palace. At the bidding of Catherine de' Medici, widow of Henri II, construction of the Tuileries Palace was begun in 1564. It was the royal and imperial residence from Henri IV, seen here at left, to Napoleon III. Work continued under Henry IV, but stopped at his death. He was assassinated by knife point in his horse-drawn carriage while stuck in a traffic jam on the Rue de la Ferronnerie on the 14th of May, 1610. Construction on the 873-long palace restarted in 1659 under Louis XIV, who only resided in the structure for 5 years, 1677 to 72, after which his regal domicile became that little bit larger edifice, Versailles. But it was during the Sun King's years on the French throne that the pedimental sculpture on both the east and west sides of the central pavilion of the palace were designed and installed, which we will come to shortly. Here is a painting by the little-known artist Hippolyte Bélanger, reviewing the troops, 1810, in which one sees on the east side of the palace, and its sculptures just above the clock that I'll be showing you. This is a marvelous photograph of the palace from the west by the most important French photographer of the 19th century, Gustave Le Gray, who lived from 1820 to 1884. You see the Seine in the foreground, the embankment, the garden, and the palace. Next, please, a second view of this palace, the work of an unknown photographer. Next, please. On the evening of the 23rd of May, 1871, during the Paris Commune, the palace was set ablaze, gutting the building. A photograph of the aftermath of the east facade facing the courtyard with the Opera Garnier visible in the distance. A second image of the carnage, this showing the west facade facing the Tuileries Gardens. Two of the sculptures I'm now going to show you, albeit in fragmentary form, are still in situ in this image. The ruins of the Tuileries Palace were demolished in 1883. As one exits the Louvre via subterranean level 2, abominably as one must, trapped like a rat and forced to walk by gift shops, endless retail stores, and food establishments, if one perseveres and continues on, heading to the stairwell giving access to the respite that is the garden above, this is what one encounters. All that remains of the pedimental sculpture of the Tuileries Palace. On the east facade were fortitude and prudence above that clock that I pointed out moments ago, as you perhaps can make out in this itsy-bitsy detail of a photograph at right. Fortitude is depicted as Minerva wearing a helmet and an aegis on her chest, or at least what remains of it, and holds a shield. Prudence is given her dual face of a woman and old man and holds a mirror around which a snake is coiled. Next, please. There's the profile of the old man. I hope you can make that out. Next, please. On the west facade, two sculptures representing faith and justice, which you can barely make out in the detail of this photograph at left. All that has survived of these life-size reclining figures is the head of justice. An important detail Between the two pairs of figures of the cardinal virtues, they hold the crown, the royal crown. So this sculptural decoration dating from 1666 to 68 plainly had a royal function. Fortitude and prudence are virtues of importance during war. Faith and justice are virtues of importance during peace. Notre Dame de Lorette, which you see at left in this view of the church looking up Rue Lafitte, is on the right bank in the 9th. To clarify what you were looking at in these two slides, that onion-shaped dome you register in the upper right corner of both images is in fact that of Sacré-Cœur Basilica atop Montmartre, way in the distance. Next, please. Notre Dame de Lorette was constructed in the years 1823 to 36. Neoclassical in style, its facade has a 4 Corinthian columned colonnade above which rises a pediment, with the patron saint of the church, the Virgin Mary, enthroned in the center, with the Christ child on her lap, his hand raised in a gesture of blessing. As you doubtless have taken in, 3 immense female figures placed above the pediment at the sides and on the apex are silhouetted by the sky. Indeed, the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, though that is not the order in which they appear, be it left to right or right to left. For logically, charity with 2 infants is intentionally placed immediately above the Virgin Mary and the Christ child within the pediment below. Faith, holding a book, signifying the Bible, and the chalice and host of the Eucharist is at the right. Next, please. And hope, with her anchor, occupies the left position. The last Parisian monument with representations of the virtues that I want to call your attention to this evening is the Fontaine Saint-Michel, the St. Michael fountain, which is located on the left bank adjacent to the Seine, right across from the Pont Saint-Michel and the Ile de la Cité, right there. When we were there in the spring, it was under scaffold for reconstruction, so some of these images are from other sources. Next, please. In this absolutely splendid circa 1900 postcard of Place Saint-Michel, one gets a sense of the prominence of the fountain as the Boulevard Saint-Michel commences from it at left, while the Rue d'Antin can be seen beginning at right. The fountain was constructed in 1858 to 1860 during Baron Haussmann's renovation of Paris during the Second Empire. Built to commemorate a chapel to the saint that once had been on this location, its original plan called for the fountain to be freestanding. In the event, it became a monumental wall fountain measuring 80 feet by 50 feet. And in this print recording its inauguration on August 15th, 1860, one can see its 4 horizontal levels evoking a triumphal arch. I want you to take note of the 2 eagles on the top of the structure. Next, please. You see here the 4 Corinthian columns of red-colored marble which rest on high sockles. The original plan for the central niche was that it would have a female figure representing peace, followed by the idea that it would hold a bronze of none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Finally, it was decided that Archangel Michael wrestling with the devil might be more appropriate. Next, please. But a decade after its construction, during the Commune in 1870 to 71, the whole monument was threatened. You will note in this image that the eagles had been toppled and never replaced. Moreover, the imperial arms that had been positioned at the fountain's apex was replaced by the emblem of the city of Paris, ships tossed in the sea, which nonetheless do not sink, I paraphrase. That's the motto of the city of Paris. It is, however, to the 4 bronze statues on the entablature above the columns that I direct your attention. Left to right. Back up one. Now go forward, please. There you go. Thank you. Stay there. Left to right. Prudence, fortitude, justice, and temperance, the 4 cardinal virtues. Next, please. On the left of the facade, prudence is shown holding a serpent and a mirror, and fortitude has a lion's skin and club. Next, please. On the right, justice holds a scale and a sword, and temperance clutches a bridle and reins. Next, please. The tablet at the top center of the fountain reads in translation, there's a French teacher in the audience, I know she can do this without me. Saint-Michel Fountain, under the reign of Napoleon III, Emperor of the French. This monument was erected by the city of Paris in the year 1860. With respect to the inclusion of prudence, fortitude, justice, and temperance, the iconographic program could not be more transparent. This aspect of the fountain is an allegory of a strong regime and was intended to diminish anarchist tendencies. Next, please. Lest one were to depart the museum this evening with a false understanding that representations of the virtues and vices were limited to the continent of Europe, I project now an image of the National Monument to the Forefathers in Plymouth, Massachusetts. 81 feet tall, made of 300 tons of New England granite, built over the course of 30 years, and dedicated in 1889, 4 seated figures, embodiments of the principles of the 19th century that were associated with the passengers of the Mayflower: morality, law, education, and liberty. These 4 figures are nonetheless dwarfed by she who towers above on the central pedestal, none other than a personification of faith. Next, please. And from our own time, the multidisciplined artist Bruce Nauman in 1988 placed 7-foot-tall neon signs on the Charles Lee Powell Structural Systems Laboratory on the campus of the University of California, San Diego, flashing on and off the names of all 14 vices and virtues. Next, please. Nauman was chosen to display his art at the American Pavilion for the 2009 Venice Biennale, flashing interchangeably around the entire perimeter of the building. His, as he called it, topical gardens blinked fortitude and anger, faith and lust, in addition to prudence, pride, and justice, avarice. It must have been positively awesome. I conclude by sharing that while moseying around the upper floor galleries of the Musée Montmartre this past May, I happily chanced upon this positively delicious and not a little hilarious illustration by one Adolphe Villette, the cover page for the February 7th, 1897 satirical illustrated weekly Le Courrier Français. We see a seated female nude, her back to an artist busy preparing his palette prior to embarking on a painting. The caption, "Vais-je poser pour le vice ou pour la vertu?" Will I pose for vice or virtue? No snarky, irreverent Nichols commentary necessary. Next, please, and my last image. The last word must be given to Shakespeare, a bust of whom I have on long-term loan, which is prominently displayed atop a bookcase in front of my office desk. In All's Well That Ends Well, Act 4, Scene 3, the inimitable playwright has the second Lord pronounce, "The web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together. Our virtues would be proud if our faults whipped them not, and our crimes would despair if they were not cherished by our virtues. I thank you for your attention.